That morning, Victor slid a lone sheet of paper across the conference table like he was issuing me a parking citation, not carving away the income I'd spent 10 years building. No explanation, no discussion, just a smug shrug and a new figure that wiped out half my life in an instant. I walked out of that room feeling small, ashamed, treated as disposable, like none of the work I'd created had ever mattered. But they didn't know the part of the story I'd never shared with anyone yet. Before we begin, please subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Victor called me upstairs at 9:12 a.m., a time I'd come to dread because it usually meant someone was about to be scolded, replaced, or quietly erased. The conference room looked the same as always, with an over-polished wood table, a faint scent of citrus cleaner, and that flickering overhead light no one ever bothered to repair, as if the entire place had decided my presence didn't matter enough to maintain. Victor sat at the head of the table in a chair that cost more than my monthly rent, leaning back like a man preparing to deliver news he'd already rehearsed. He didn't even motion for me to sit, just nudged a single cream-colored sheet of paper forward with 2 fingers, eyes already drifting back to his phone. I picked it up, confused. The first thing I noticed was the number 80,000. The second thing I noticed was that my current salary, 160,000, wasn't listed anywhere. No comparison, no reasoning, just the downgrade. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I scanned the corporate jargon about structural recalibrations and market efficiency realignments, a stack of words that looked professionally printed but meant nothing except, "You're lucky we're not firing you." I swallowed and said, "You're cutting my salary in half." He didn't even glance up. "We're adjusting your compensation to reflect your true market value, and frankly, Aubrey, you should be grateful to still have a position here. Most R&D programs are being downsized across the industry." He finally raised his eyes, and the smirk that followed made my stomach clench. The kind of expression men like him wore when they thought they'd boxed you in. "Your royalty arrangement is no longer valid, by the way," he added, casually flipping his phone over. It took a second for the words to sink in. "My royalty. What do you mean? Invalid?" It was an informal understanding with previous leadership, nothing binding. That informal understanding was a handshake agreement with Eleanor Vance, the founder's daughter, the same woman who had promised I'd share the upside if my formulations ever made real money. They had made money. Millions. My peptide complexes were the backbone of Solaratorm's entire rebrand, the reason their quarterly numbers climbed for 3 straight years, and now, with a single shrug, Victor was wiping all of it away as if my work were an error he was correcting. "The renewal line uses my formulations," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The brightening treatment, the overnight serum, everything you've been marketing as the company's scientific breakthrough." "Those are company assets," he snapped, "created on company time using company resources. Don't start overestimating your role here." I felt something inside me tighten, a coil drawing back. Not anger yet, just clarity. Cold and precise. He tapped the paper again. "Sign the acknowledgement. HR will process the change, or don't sign, and will process your exit instead. Your choice." My chair squeaked when I finally sat down, a weak sound compared to the silent luxury he occupied. I read the page again, the flickering light glinting off the cream-colored surface, and something important settled in. This wasn't a conversation. This wasn't even a demotion. It was a humiliation, a message from Victor that he believed he owned me, that he believed he owned everything I had ever created. I set the paper down. I didn't sign it. And in that moment, without saying a word, I made the decision that would end his entire career. I walked out of the conference room without looking back, the unsigned paper still lying in front of Victor like an unanswered insult. My hands were steady, but inside something had cracked open, not broken, just changed. The kind of shift that happens when humiliation burns hot enough to expose the truth beneath it. I took the stairs instead of the elevator. Every step down toward the basement lab felt like stripping away another layer of the lie I'd lived under for years. Solar liked to claim its research wing was state-of-the-art, but that was only true upstairs. Down where I worked, the paint peeled in thin curls at the corners, the heating vents rattled in winter, and the only window was a small rectangle at floor level looking out onto gravel and a forgotten cigarette butt. My space was never meant to be a lab. The company had converted it from an old storage room back when Eleanor still ran things and believed innovation didn't require marble floors. I unlocked the door, flipped on the lights, and inhaled the familiar mix of solvents, sterilizing alcohol, and weak ventilation. It wasn't glamorous, but at least down here, the equipment didn't lie to me. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. Pipettes arranged by size, the centrifuge humming from work I'd started that morning, my notebook open to a page filled with ratios I'd spent weeks testing. That notebook had been with me longer than them. A green graph paper journal I'd bought during my graduate program at the University of Colorado, long before the company had ever known my name. I reached for it, lifting it like something delicate. My entire scientific life lived inside those pages. My peptide stability models, my early failures, my first breakthrough with Kamai delivery, all of it in my handwriting. No company lawyer, no corporate restructuring, no arrogant COO could erase that. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed something I'd forgotten, a date written at the bottom of one of the earliest formulations. It was months before my first day at Solaraderm. My breath caught as a memory from that year surfaced, me sitting in a cramped apartment surrounded by textbooks, determined to build something that could one day change the market. I had walked into this company already knowing how to build the thing they ultimately profited from. They had only supplied the tools, not the ideas. And tools weren't ownership. I ran my fingers along the edge of the notebook and felt an unexpected calm settle in. Victor thought he'd cornered me because he believed Solar M owned my mind. But this notebook proved they didn't. I sat at my workstation, opened my laptop, and began photographing each page. Not out of panic, not out of fear, but out of certainty. I didn't yet know my exact next move, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever came after this moment would not belong to Solaraderm. And that basement lab, the one they shoved me into and forgot about, was about to become the birthplace of a decision that would unravel everything they believed they controlled. When I finished photographing the last page of my notebook, I closed it gently, the way someone closes a chapter they know they'll never reopen the same way again. I didn't pack my things in dramatic fury. There was no slammed door, no raised voice, no tears. I moved with the kind of quiet certainty that frightens people far more than rage. A cardboard box sat near the recycling bin, half crushed on one side. I reshaped it as best I could and started placing my belongings inside. My backup goggles, the mug that said, "Beaker Babe," the succulent Eleanor gave me years ago after I stabilized my first formulation for the company. I paused for a second before placing the succulent in the box. It was the only thing there that ever made me feel seen. When everything was ready, I turned off the light, leaving the lab humming in darkness, and walked toward HR. Monica looked up as I entered, pushing her glasses up her nose, confused by the sight of the box. "Aubrey, you leaving early?" "Leaving permanently," I said, setting the unsigned paperwork on her desk. She blinked a few times like her brain was buffering. Wait. Did you talk to Victor? Tell him I'm not signing anything." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I didn't wait for the rest. I walked out of that building the same way I'd walked in on my first day, alone and unnoticed, but this time carrying something they didn't expect. The truth about what belonged to me. The afternoon air in Denver was cold, sharp enough to sting when I inhaled. My car door groaned the same way it always did, but this time the sound didn't annoy me. It sounded like freedom, however small. I drove home without music, just the sound of snowmelt splashing under the tires. My mind was strangely calm, not racing, not panicking. Humiliation had burned away the fog and left clarity in its place, a clarity I didn't know I was capable of. When I got home, I set the box on the kitchen counter, made a pot of coffee, and opened my laptop. The first thing I pulled up was my employment contract. I read every line, every clause, every piece of corporate language they'd used to protect themselves. And that was when I saw it. The detail that changed the entire trajectory of everything that followed. My non-compete clause prohibited me from being employed by a direct competitor. It said nothing about licensing intellectual property I already owned. Nothing about consulting. Nothing about offering exclusive rights to formulations that originated from my graduate research. I wasn't boxed in. I was unlocked. That realization surged through me like electricity. I opened a new tab and began listing every skincare company with the financial power and distribution reach to threaten Solaraderm. 15 companies at first, then I eliminated the ones too small, too chaotic, or too tangled in acquisitions. That left 3. But one stood out immediately. North River Skincare Corporation, Chicago-based, established in retail, respected in clinical trials, but notoriously weak in peptide therapy. They'd tried and failed to crack the anti-aging market multiple times. Their analysts constantly criticized their lack of a flagship product. If anyone needed what I had and had the power to use it to crush Solaraderm, it was North River. I stared at their website, my cursor hovering over the contact directory. This was the moment in a normal life where someone steps back, questions themselves, wonders if this is too risky, too bold, too unthinkable. But humiliation has a way of erasing hesitation. I clicked on executive leadership. My eyes landed on a name, Dr. Selena Hart, Chief Innovation Officer. I wrote the email directly, with no attachment, no formula screenshots, nothing that could be copied, just enough detail to earn her attention. My fingers moved without hesitation. Dr. Hart, my name is Aubrey Lane. Until today, I served as the senior formulation architect at Solaraderm Labs. I developed the peptide complexes that generate the majority of their revenue. My employment has ended, and I retain ownership of the foundational intellectual property. If you're open to discussing exclusive licensing rights, I'm available to talk. I reread it once, then hit send. It was 8:04 p.m. I expected silence for at least a day. I expected my message to be buried under corporate noise or swallowed by spam filters. But at 8:21 p.m., my phone buzzed. One new email. Aubrey, thank you for reaching out. Can you be in Chicago tomorrow afternoon? That was the moment I knew my quiet exit wasn't an ending. It was the opening move in a game. Solaraderm didn't even realize they'd already lost. I barely slept that night, not from fear or nerves, but something closer to momentum, like my mind had already taken a running leap into the next phase and my body was struggling to catch up. By morning, the snow had stopped, leaving a thin crust of ice on my windows. I packed a small suitcase, grabbed my notebook, and booked the earliest flight to Chicago. No hesitation, no backward glance. At the airport, everything felt strangely muted, like I was moving through someone else's life. The security line, the boarding announcements, the white noise of passengers complaining, none of it touched me. My focus stayed locked on Dr. Hart's email. Her response had been precise, almost surgical. No wasted words, which told me she understood leverage, timing, and the scent of opportunity. When the plane touched down at O'Hare, the sky looked like brushed steel. I took a rideshare straight to North River's headquarters, 20 stories of glass and dark metal rising over the river like it had something to prove. Inside, The air smelled faintly of eucalyptus, not as a performance, but because someone here actually cared about creating a space that helped people think. A receptionist handed me a visitor badge and sent me to the 17th floor. When the elevator doors opened, Dr. Selena Hart was already waiting. She didn't offer a stiff corporate handshake. She shook my hand the way a scientist greets another scientist. Firm, focused, no pretense. "Aubrey," she said, "thank you for coming. Lab's this way." That was the first sign she respected me. She didn't lead me to a conference room filled with stale muffins and polished executives. She took me where real work happened. The North River Lab was the opposite of Solaradarm's basement dungeon: bright, open, air that actually circulated. Even the equipment seemed to hum with a cleaner, sharper tone. She guided me to a private testing area. "Show me what you've got," she said. I set my notebook on the stainless steel table and opened it to the first page of the peptide stability progression, my handwriting flowing across the graph paper, dense but ordered. Years of trial and error, refinement after refinement, patterns only I fully understood. Selena leaned over the pages, and I watched her expression sharpen. Not shock, not envy, recognition. She saw the science for what it truly was: a breakthrough Solar never deserved to profit from. "You developed this before they hired you," she said, not as a question, but as confirmation. "Yes, my thesis is time-stamped 3 months before my contract with them." She nodded once, and the contract gives them usage rights, nothing more. Selena didn't smile, but something in her posture shifted, an inaudible click of pieces locking into place. "Walk with me," she said. She led me to an executive suite where 3 people waited: a legal counsel named Brian, a product strategist named Mira, and North River's CEO, Daman Brooke. Daman looked younger than I expected, early 40s, confident in the way someone is when they understand the scale of the table they're sitting at. "Ms. Lane," he said, "I hear you might be holding the missing piece we've been chasing for years." I sat, notebook still in hand, no fear, no shame, and explained what I built, how Solaradarm mishandled it, and how their arrogance blinded them to the power they never truly owned. Brian took notes quickly. Mira watched me with the kind of hunger only someone in product development understands. Daman steepled his fingers and asked the question that mattered. "What are you offering?" "Exclusive licensing rights," I said. "All existing formulations and future advancements. And your terms." I'd practiced the number on the plane, rolling it over in my mind until it felt real. 11 million upfront, 6% net royalties, a directorship title with full lab autonomy. No one laughed. No one flinched. They exchanged looks, calculating in silence. Finally, Daman said, "Give us a moment." They stepped out. I stayed seated, staring at the Chicago skyline through the glass. 30 minutes later, they returned. Daman held out his hand. 9 million upfront, 6% royalties, Director of Advanced Innovation, immediate onboarding pending legal review. It wasn't exactly my number, but it was close enough to taste victory. I shook his hand, and the moment our palms met, I knew he had no idea what was coming. When I stepped out of North River's building, the wind sliced across the Chicago riverfront like a blade, but I barely felt it. My mind was already racing through the next steps. What evidence needed lining up? Which documents required review? Which parts of my life were about to change? I took a cab to my hotel near the Loop and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the business card Brian had slipped into my hand before I left. "Call this number tonight," he'd said. "She's the best IP attorney in the Midwest. Independent. Not tied to us. You'll want her." That alone told me North River wasn't playing games. They wanted this clean, airtight, and they wanted Solaraderm to choke on its own ignorance. I dialed the number. A woman answered on the second ring. "This is attorney Meredith Shaw." Her voice was calm and steady, like she'd already handled a dozen corporate fires that day, and mine was just the next log. I explained everything in precise terms: my thesis, my formulations, the development timeline, the contract language, the attempted salary cut, the dissolved handshake agreement, the notebook I'd kept since grad school. She listened without interrupting, which told me she was already building the case in her head. "Send me copies of your thesis, your notebook scans, and your employment contract," she said. "I'll call you back within 24 hours. True to her word, she called the next morning at 9:03. "Aubrey," she said, "you're in the clear. More than clear." She walked me through the details: the thesis timestamp predating my employment by months, the absence of any IP transfer clause in the Solaratorm contract, the legal distinction between usage rights and ownership rights, and the fact that the refinements I made at Solaratorm were derivative of my original independent research, not new intellectual property created under the company's umbrella. "They'll try to argue you refined the formulations on their time," she said, "but they can't prove the foundational innovation belongs to them. So North River is safe to license from you." "Safe," she repeated, "and strategically brilliant." I hung up and stared at the ceiling. For the first time since Victor slid that paper across the table, something inside me settled. Not relief, validation. The next 48 hours blurred into email chains, contract drafts, and late-night calls with North River's team. Every line was examined, tightened, reinforced. By noon on the third day, we were ready. Daman scheduled the signing in his office, the skyline stretching behind him like a silent witness. I read every clause, every subclause, confirming the language matched exactly what I wanted. When we reached the signature line, my hand didn't shake. I signed. Daman countersigned. Brian notarized the documents, stamped them, and slid a copy into a folder embossed with my name. "The wire will hit within the hour," Daman said. "Welcome to North River." In the elevator, my phone buzzed with a bank notification. $9 million transferred into my account. A number that didn't look real. A number that erased every moment Victor had made me feel replaceable. I should have lingered on it longer, but my phone vibrated again, this time with a number I recognized. Solar's HR line. I let it ring. Then it rang again. 5 missed calls. A voicemail. I didn't need to listen to know what was happening. They'd finally understood what my silence meant. Back in. Denver. Panic was setting in, but the real explosion hadn't even started. I checked out of the hotel, boarded my flight home, and leaned back in my seat. Solar had no idea they'd just declared war on the wrong person. 2 days after I returned to Denver, the first legal blow landed. A thick envelope arrived at my apartment, stamped with Solar M's logo and filled with the kind of aggressive legal language companies use when they're panicking but pretending they aren't. They accused me of theft of trade secrets, unlawful dissemination of proprietary formulations, breach of loyalty, and a list of other claims clearly assembled in a conference room full of sweating executives who didn't fully understand what they were alleging. I forwarded it to Meredith. She called me 5 minutes later. "They filed too fast," she said, sounding almost amused. "They jumped without a plan." "This is sloppier than I expected." A court date was set, a preliminary injunction hearing. If Solaratorm won, North River would have to freeze development on everything tied to my formulations. If they lost, the momentum would swing permanently in our favor. The morning of the hearing was cold enough to burn my lungs. I arrived early, wearing a black coat and carrying only my notebook and a folder Meredith told me to bring. We met on the courthouse steps. "Look composed," she murmured. "They're going to come in hot." She wasn't wrong. Solar's legal team charged in like they were auditioning for a courtroom drama, matching suits, rolling carts of binders, and an arrogance so thick it was almost visible. and behind them, looking strangely small without his polished office backdrop, was Victor. His confidence was gone, replaced by a tight-jawed anxiety that looked foreign on him. He didn't meet my eyes. We entered the courtroom. The judge was a woman in her 60s with short gray hair, sharp glasses, and the expression of someone who had seen every corporate tantrum imaginable. The hearing opened with Soleratorm's attorney, an overly animated man who gestured so wildly he knocked over his own water bottle, insisting I had stolen the company's core intellectual assets and handed them directly to a competitor. Miss Lane's actions pose immediate and irreparable harm to Soleratorm's market position, the attorney insisted. Her formulations are the foundation of our flagship products. Meredith rose slowly, as if she had all the time in the world. Your Honor, she began, Soleratorm cannot claim ownership of something it never owned. She handed the judge a packet containing the first 10 pages of my graduate thesis, highlighted, time-stamped, archived, and authenticated by the university. Then she presented the employment contract, meticulously labeled. This contract grants Soleratorm usage rights only, she continued. There is no clause transferring ownership of Miss Lane's prior intellectual property, and the foundational formulations predate her employment by months. The judge flipped through the documents, then looked directly at Soleratorm's attorney. Counsel, she asked, do you have a signed IP transfer agreement? The attorney blinked. Your Honor, the employment agreement? That is not what I asked, she interrupted. Do you have a signed IP transfer? No, Your Honor. The judge turned to Meredith. Continue. Meredith showed the evolution of my formulations through notebook entries, dated, clear, and independent. Then she revealed the final piece, Soleratorm's own internal documentation, obtained legally, showing insufficient formulation detail to recreate the product. They never required Ms. Lane to submit full independent research notes, she said, because they did not own them. Soleratorm's attorney tried to pivot, arguing that improvements made during my employment belonged to the company. Meredith countered with case law, scientific precedent, and the fact that derivative refinements do not equate to foundational ownership. The judge listened, and when both sides finished, she leaned back, tapped her pen twice, and spoke. The evidence overwhelmingly suggests Ms. Lane retains ownership of her foundational work. Soleratorm's request for an injunction is denied. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Victor's face drained of color. The judge continued. If Soleratorm wishes to pursue damages, you may proceed to a full trial, but there will be no emergency relief granted today. The gavel hit the wood, louder than it should have sounded. Outside the courtroom, Meredith allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. That, she said, was them falling off a cliff. And she was right, because once the injunction was denied, North River moved at lightning speed. Within weeks, they launched the first line of products made from my formulations, improved, stabilized, perfected in their labs. The market reacted immediately. Beauty reviewers called the new serum a category reset. Retailers reported sellouts within days. Influencers praised the texture, the scent, the visible results. Meanwhile, Soleratorm spiraled. Without access to the complete formulations, their new batches separated, destabilized, oxidized. Customers complained. Retailers demanded returns. Medical consultants abandoned them. Their stock fell 21% in the first quarter, then 30%, then 40%. And on a gray Thursday morning, I woke to a news alert. Soleratorm announces leadership restructuring amid performance crisis. Victor's name wasn't in the article because they don't print the names of people who've already been erased. Later that afternoon, when I arrived at North River's headquarters, the VP of Strategy handed me the preliminary royalty statement. I opened it. My cut for the first 60 days, $1.8 million. I ran my thumb over the number, feeling the weight of it. Not the money, but the proof. They had tried to humiliate me. They had tried to strip everything away. And now all they had left were the consequences of believing I was small. The first time I walked into my new lab at North River as Director of Advanced Innovation, I paused in the doorway and simply breathed. Not because of the equipment, though it was better than anything I'd ever touched at Courtroom, but because of the feeling: space, respect, air that didn't vibrate with fear or silent resentment. For the first time in years, no one looked up expecting me to justify my existence. No one waited for me to fail. Instead, 3 junior chemists straightened the moment they saw me, eager, curious, ready to learn. That simple shift, people truly valuing what I brought to the table, felt more powerful than the wire transfer, the court ruling, or even the headlines. This was what I had been working toward without even realizing it. I moved between stations, observing mixtures, checking notes, studying early results from our next formulation. It was good work, cleaner, and more ambitious than anything I could have achieved in a basement lab with a flickering light. I felt myself settling into a rhythm. Not rushed, not cornered, just focused. Focused on creation instead of survival. Later that afternoon, Daman invited me to his office overlooking the river. "We want to expand your team," he said, clasping his hands on the desk. "More staff, more budget, more support. You've proven what you're capable of." It struck me then how different this place was. At Solaratum, competence had been treated like a threat. Here, it was investment fuel. "I'll need autonomy," I said, "and full decision-making power on R&D direction." Daman nodded without hesitation. Done. When I left his office, a quiet satisfaction unfurled in my chest. Not revenge, not triumph. Something steadier. Ownership in the truest sense. That evening, I went home, made tea, and sat by my living room window. City lights reflected in the glass like small sparks drifting across the skyline. My phone buzzed with a news alert about Solaratum stock sliding another 12%, but I didn't open it. Their downfall no longer belonged to me. I had started a new chapter, one built on work I created, defended, and finally reclaimed. As I sat there, I thought back to the moment Victor slid that paper across the table. The arrogance, the dismissal, the assumption that I would fold because they believed they owned me. They thought they were cutting my salary. What they really did was sever the last thread tying me to their mediocrity. I leaned back, letting the warmth of the tea settle through my hands. Tomorrow, I'd continue refining our new formulation, one that would make the anti-aging market look prehistoric, one that would cement North River as an industry powerhouse, one that would ensure no one could ever underestimate me again. They tried to shrink my world to a single insult on a single piece of paper. Instead, they enlarged it. They pushed me toward a life where I didn't just survive. I built. I won. And I finally stepped into the space they were too blind to realize I deserved all along. Sometimes a story like mine reminds me how easy it is to forget our own worth when we've spent years giving everything to a place that only ever took. I didn't leave Solaratum because I suddenly became brave. I left because humiliation has a strange way of pulling the curtain back and showing you the truth you've ignored for too long. What I learned is painfully simple. People who benefit from your silence will always expect it to last forever. They count on it. They build entire systems on the hope that you won't look too closely at what you've created or what you're entitled to. But the moment you finally open your eyes, the moment you stop apologizing for taking up space, everything shifts. Not because you fight back loudly, but because you finally understand the power of walking away. My revenge wasn't about destroying anyone. It wasn't about becoming richer or proving that. Solaratum had underestimated me. It was about reclaiming the chapters of my life I had unintentionally handed over to people who didn't value them. And yes, Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife, quieter, cleaner, and far more devastating than rage. The real lesson is knowing the difference. In today's world, especially in the American workplace, too many people stay in jobs that belittle their talent, dismiss their work, or treat them as disposable. You don't need a dramatic courtroom win or $1 million contract to reclaim yourself. You just need clarity, self-respect, and the courage to act before someone else defines your worth for you. Start today. Write down what you actually contribute, not what your title says. Read your contracts, agreements, and obligations more carefully than ever before. Identify one boundary you've been avoiding and set it quietly but firmly. Start researching your options. Even if you're not ready to move yet, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or quietly pushed aside, share your story in the comments. And if this resonated with you, please share it, subscribe for more, and help keep these stories alive.